Greetings, everyone, and thank you for joining us for Our Whole Lives Taking Flight. Our webinar today is with Martha Kempner, Sex on Wednesday. My name is the Reverend Amy Johnson, and I am the Minister for Sexuality, Education, and Justice in the national setting of the United Church of Christ. And we'll introduce other folks here today. Melanie?
Good morning. I'm Dr. Melanie Davis. I am the Unitarian Universalist Association's Our Whole Lives Program Manager. Martha?
Good morning. I'm Martha Kempner. I'm a sexual health educator and writer and the author of the newsletter Sex on Wednesday, and it is Wednesday.
It is Wednesday, and we welcome you here, and we were super excited that our webinar falls on a Wednesday when we asked you if you could come and be with us. I want to just say a couple things before we get started here this morning. The first one is that there will be no Our Whole Lives Taking Flight in December. We're taking that month off. So after today, we invite you to take a look at our really wonderful and robust playlist and look at any of those webinars maybe you haven't seen, or rewatch some of the wonderful ones we have, and we'll see you back in January. Also, just a note, I know Andrea has put in the chat to go ahead and introduce yourself. So it's lovely to see all of you popping in and letting us know where you're here from this morning. And also, if you have questions as we move along, if you can use that Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen instead of the chat, that really helps us to manage things and make it run really smoothly. So
before we get started, if I may, I wanted to share our January speaker will be Dr. Tanya Bass, who is a public health educator from North Carolina, the Southern sexologist. And she will be talking about professional development and continuing education and how important it is for sex educators. And for those of you who may not know, you can pre-order the second edition of the kindergarten through first grade Our Whole Lives curriculum. And I am so grateful for Amy for taking the lead on shepherding that to completion. So go ahead. Yesterday, we sent out PDFs to everybody who had made pre-orders, and I'm already getting positive feedback. So you can go to UCC Resources or the UUA Bookstore and place your orders. Send me a copy of your receipt or Amy a copy of your receipt, and we can get you that PDF.
if you have ordered through UCC Resources, we're working on automatically getting that to you. So
good.
So let us know if that isn't happening. But we're super excited that we're to the point where we could get you the PDF and that we are just as close to being press ready. So very exciting that we have that, and in the new format too. If you don't know what we're talking about with the new format, then you just need to go back and listen to last month's webinar. All right, so let's get started with Sex on Wednesday. Martha, I don't even remember who forwarded your newsletter to me, and I just immediately subscribed because it was just so delightful and delightful in I think I should say that I found it delightful because I really enjoy like snarky humor. And I think that you excel at that and also in taking on really serious topics. So our first question for you is like, what inspired you to do what you do and to start Sex on Wednesday?
So I have a long, at this point, quite long career in sex education. I was at SECUS for a lot of years in the late 90s, early 2000s, when we were dealing with abstinence-only education. I was tracking controversies over sex ed. And then I was teaching a class on this sociology of sexuality was the name of the course. And one of the assignments that I gave my students was to read the news, because sex is in the news every day. And sometimes it's obvious, but sometimes it's not. That, there are just all of these overlapping issues. Reproductive rights and abortion is an overlapping issue. Contraception is obviously an important issue. There's surveys on, both kind of the serious and the consumer all the time. And so I feel like there's so many issues that are getting lost. So I thought that that's what I could do with a newsletter, was to really just bring these issues out into the front and kind of curate for people a little bit of a list of what's going on. But because it's a little cathartic for me to do it in a snarky way, because it's just, if you're not laughing at this moment in time, we're crying.
Yeah, and I like the fact that it's not the standard Jon Stewart, Trevor Noah, you're a different perspective, and that's welcome, I think. Other than Samantha Bee, I don't know that there are too many people taking the same journalistic / funny, not always funny, but, witty, I guess, dry humor, snark sometimes too. What is it that you have found really that approach? Like, do people ever take offense at that, or is that why your readers are captivated?
I'm hoping it's why they're captivated. So far, I haven't had people take offense to, be like, why are you making fun of this? Or why are you joking about that? I think it makes it more palatable. I think if I did a kind of dry rehashing of the news every week, I'm not sure that people would tune in. I will say it's a subscription only newsletter. It's free, so everyone on the call should definitely subscribe and tell your friends. But it's subscription, so it's an opt-in kind of a thing. So it's possible that the people who I would be offending just aren't reading it. And I find that I'm a little sad by that, actually. Helping all of you guys and everyone who is already involved in sexual health and already care about it, stay up to date and also be amused is one great thing. I would also like the other side to read it. I was reminded the other day, so one of the things I did when I was at SECUS was review abstinence only until marriage curricula for falsehoods and kind of messages of shame. And we sometimes had a hard time getting a hold of those curriculum because they didn't want to sell them to us. Once they figured out we were from SECUS, they didn't want us to have them because they knew we didn't agree. And I had an intern call one of the publishers, and a woman got on the phone. Her husband was the writer of the curriculum. And she said, I don't want you to look at the curricula. The last time you did a review, you were very mean to him. And I was like, I don't think I was mean to him. I just disagreed with him. But then I can't quite remember the conversation, but she's like, I don't think you should have this. And I said, that's where you and I differ. I want you to read every single thing that I write, because I'm hoping that at some point I will be so persuasive that you will change your mind. I'm not sure I ever hit that level. And of course, Of course, I also used, I believe my husband, who does not have the same last name as me, purchased many abstinence only until
Hey,
marriage.
where there's a will, there's a way.
Right.
For those who aren't familiar with the term SIECUS, it's the Sexuality Information and Education Council of the US. And when the UCC and the UUA were getting together to talk about how to create our whole lives, the SIECUS guidelines, which say what people should learn when, were a key element in the development of our whole lives.
And I actually worked on, I think it was the 3rd edition of those guidelines, which was a great grounding in sex education for me. And I think in many ways, those guidelines have been superseded by the content standards, because that's how public schools are working nowadays, but there's still a really good wealth of information on messages.
Yeah, the content standards for folks who are interested in those, SIECUS was part of that, as was Advocates for Youth and Planned Parenthood. Answer. I did a white paper a couple of years ago when the first content standards came out, and Our Whole Lives meet or beat the standards. So we can be really happy that Our Whole Lives is still aligned with the best thinkers in the country.
Yeah, and I want to say too, I mean, if I think we're probably preaching to the choir here with anybody who's on, or at least the folks that have said hi in the chat, but just a reminder, I guess, that our whole lives, this isn't just like opinion-based sexuality education, which I mean, I laugh, but it's sort of that laugh cry thing that Martha was talking about, right? Because in the current climate, that's what a lot of people want you to think. They want you to think that the work that we are doing and the ideas that we are promoting are somehow a liberal agenda or opinions that people have, when in actuality, it is science-based, medically accurate, and based on the SIECUS guidelines and the national standards for sexuality education. So these are things that a lot of thought and research and care have gone into creating. So it's not just like a whim or somebody's opinion, which unfortunately, oftentimes some of our opposition, and I'm not using that word lightly, it is people's opinion and not fact-based. Can you speak to that at all, Martha?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's even among people who are generally in agreement on teaching young people about sex, there's a little bit of a, well, I'm a grown up, I've had sex, I know what I'm talking about, I can teach it. I last week I was a little, I don't know if it was offended or annoyed by the episode of Grey's Anatomy that aired, I guess, 2 weeks ago now, where the doctors who are surgeons, right, the surgical interns, just decided to put together a video. Well, they didn't, they were forced to put together a video on sex ed for high school students. And I like it in theory. Shonda Rhimes likes to give us a lot of message with our entertainment, and her messages align with my values. So I'm kind of good with it. But at the same time, there was an underlying message there that anyone with an ounce of medical knowledge and a video camera could, teach young people about sex. And I was a little upset by that. I think everyone on this call has some background and some training before we actually do this, because it's not that easy.
It's not. And, there are a lot of like TikTokers and Instagrammers who are out there, and the word I hate is sexpert. Just because you have sex or you've read a lot doesn't mean that you are an expert by any means. And it's not that everybody has to have an advanced degree by any means. People can learn things all sorts of ways, but you have to be a wise consumer. There has to be an element. And I think that's what you do, Martha, is that you're curating the news so that people can be more educated and savvy media consumers. How do you select, how do you curate what the articles that you're going to include in your newsletter?
Yes, I will say this is an unscientific process, I admit it. I have I have a media, we used to call them clipping services, right? When I started at Seekis, we actually physically got the clips, but I have a media service that tracks keywords for me. And I read through that week's news. And I look for things. I like reporting on research, especially research on like contraception or STDs, so that we're all a little bit ahead of what's coming out next. I like to report on politics and where politics and sex ed and abortion and all of these issues overlap, which is at this moment in time everywhere. I do like to catch people saying pretty stupid things. As you know, I have my "That's Not How It Effing Works." I have a T-shirt. I have stickers. I could probably send you guys some stickers.
Nice. Okay. Yeah.
But so I like to correct misinformation. So definitely when I see something that's misinformation, especially celebrity driven misinformation, because you're right, like the internet, TikTok, social media, it's a great leveler of the playing field on the one hand, and on the other hand, not everyone's opinion is equally valid on every topic. So, so there's been the, I believe a few months ago, there was one of the Kardashians, I honestly can't keep them straight, who was like drinking semen on the advice of her doctor to help get pregnant. I like to make sure people know that kind of thing is not a good idea. Gwyneth Paltrow is really not the person you want to listen to when it comes to what you should do with your vagina. So those usually make it into the feed. And I like a mix. I try not to, depress everybody in a week. If there's like 4 really bad stories, I try to make sure there's something in there we can laugh about. So
do you have like a top hits, like a top 10 stories from that you can recollect that were just kind of like either too out there for belief, or that you just they got your funny bone going?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of them are when celebrities try to do it, right? Nicki Minaj's cousins, right? Her boyfriend's cousin's friend's testicles blew up like a balloon after his COVID shot. We read about that one. Drake putting hot sauce in his condom to make sure that nobody got pregnant, which, I mean, the more alarming thing about that was that she actually did try the sabotage that he thought she was going to try, which was she tried to take the contents of the condom to get herself pregnant so she could then, I guess, have a child and charge him for child support forever. So those are always in there. I think I also, even more depressing is when the when people who are hired to make decisions on these topics just get it so wrong. I think this was before my Sex on Wednesday time, but I did write about it. There was a state legislator who was questioning a doctor during some women's health hearing, and he wanted to know why we couldn't just use endoscopy to see the baby in the womb.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm wondering if that isn't the same person who said, "Oh, if it's ectopic, you can just move it."
Yeah, just take it out, move it over here. No big deal.
Why didn't I think of that?
And I think there's a lot of funny there. There's also a lot of this is kind of crazy because he's making decisions. My phrase, "That's not how it fucking works" phrase really started way before Sex on Wednesday with Todd Aiken. Do we remember Todd Aiken? Who yes. He was on the House Science Committee, and he said that a woman's body has a way of shutting it down. Mm-hmm. Yep, shut that down. Karen Richter said it. That if you're raped, you can't get pregnant because your body knows. And the other comment was if it was legitimate rape. So obviously he felt that there were, it suggests that only the guy who jumps out of the bushes with a gun is legitimate, and none of this is true. And so I did a pretty fun run through of all of my top hits on That's Not How It Works. at Harvard Sex Week last year.
Oh,
Right.
lucky Harvard.
And but those, you know, this is funny and disturbing because that man was making decisions about science.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. I mean, and I'm wondering, so you've been doing this for such a long time. I'm wondering if there's anything that ever surprises you, or and particularly like maybe in a good way, because I think we've all had the kind of like, oh my gosh moments, you know, so many,
Yes.
so many, like fatigue,
Outrage
so many
porn.
moments of that, right? But is there anything that surprises you in a good way as you do your work?
Yeah, you know, early on when I was doing Sex on Wednesday, I wrote I remember the headline, I think, was Topper McFawn is giving me hope. Topper McFawn, um, please, I may have his last name wrong. We'll go back and look, but he, state legislator, Republican, pretty conservative from Vermont, who put out, who introduced a bill that condoms should be available in all Vermont schools because the most important thing was keeping kids from getting pregnant. And because the way to prevent abortion was, which he felt was important, was to make sure people didn't get pregnant in the first place. And I was like, wow, Topper gets it,
Yeah.
right? Like, so I think sometimes there are people who get it from unusual sources, right? There are some politicians, there was a couple of politicians who got thwarted, and I'm blanking on the state, it was a southern state, who went forward with a bipartisan suggestion of a program to provide LARC to low-income women. And they made all of the right arguments, right? They unfortunately it didn't get passed, but they, you know, made all of the right arguments in addition to this is the way to prevent abortion. This is the way to save money. We need to keep people from unintended pregnancy. Thank you for yes, I do, like everyone else, speak in acronyms.
Yeah, and I mean that LARC, I mean, there have been more than one study about
Colorado is an excellent
works.
example.
Yeah, I mean, Colorado did a pilot of that, right? And with giving free long-acting reversible contraception to teens and to, I think it was low-income folks. And lo and behold, the abortion rate went down.
And the high school graduation rate went up.
Yeah.
And the welfare programs in the state saved, I don't remember the exact money, but millions of dollars. So it was a huge success. And so when I see, you know, states that you wouldn't expect it, when I see people kind of explaining it, and I think also, and I'm not going to come up with a good story for this right now, but anytime I see empathy from people in power, I feel like that's what we're missing right now, is, you know, an empathetic approach.
I wish too, though, that we could see programs that didn't demand or didn't require a particular type of contraception or healthcare to certain groups of people.
Absolutely.
You know, like, why can't low-income people have as many options as people who have private insurance have? You know, that, I think that's something that we need to work on as well. But so Amy and I are not allowed to take political positions because we work for religious organizations. We can invite you all to vote. Vote in the best interest of this country. And I wanted to mention that because the subject of sex ed is sex education is so much in the media now, we're hearing from people, and we ourselves are getting requests from the media to be interviewed. And to Martha's point, you know, sometimes people get it right, and sometimes people think they get it right and they're misquoted, intentionally misquoted. Sometimes they're just their comments are taken out of context. So what Amy and I would invite folks to do, if you're contacted, not you, Martha, but the folks who are listening, if you're contacted by the media, please refer the reporters to me and Amy. We're used to addressing these issues, and we know how to speak so that we're, talking in sound bites that will work for reporters, and being mindful that of what we don't want to say as well. So you're never obligated to say yes when a reporter calls you. You can think about it. You can call us, email us, and say, hey, this person wants to ask these questions. Should I answer them? Above all, if you decide to answer any kind of questions for a local reporter or anybody else, please only speak on behalf of your own program. This is what we do in this particular setting. Any questions about what happens overall with our whole lives or where it's used, those should be directed to me and to Amy. And the other thing is that please don't get trapped into ever judging what other people are doing in other faith communities or other settings. Let's just talk about OWL and the goodness that we have in OWL. But we're here as your media resources.
Yeah, I did want to say I just popped a couple links in the chat. One is Our Faith, Our Vote. The UCC has a pretty robust campaign called Our Faith, Our Vote that gives some of the reasons why we support certain legislation and issues as part of our faith. And we also have a very robust and ever-growing reproductive justice page. So while we are not partisan or taking, candidating or anything like that, we do have pretty strong denominational positions on certain issues like reproductive justice and the right to choice and the affirming of LGBTQ folks. There's just some really horrific stuff happening in Florida right now, particularly around gender identity and folks who identify as trans. So, and that's not just in Florida, but that's the stuff that's popping up on my news feed right now. So we do have positions. We do have positions that are not neutral around those things. So just letting you know, and Melanie put in UU the vote as well for the UU equivalent of that. So Martha, how do you remain hopeful in this climate? Speaking of voting and midterms coming up and all the issues, how do you stay hopeful?
Anyone who knows me knows that optimism is not my natural setting, for sure. I guess I stay hopeful because I have teenagers. I have one teenager. I have a 16-year-old and a 12-year-old, and their perception of the world, I mean, they understand how scary it is right now, but they also have so many views that I wasn't aware of, and they have them at 16, right? So, or 12, my 12-year-old talks about gender identity all the time. Her friends are experimenting and entirely accepted no matter what they're doing, right? Even if they, change their mind multiple times. I get corrected for using the wrong pronouns, even though I wasn't informed of a switch. I'm like, okay. But they're doing it and they're talking about it all the time. My 16-year-old is talking about politics all the time, and she votes in the 2024 presidential election, right? And so I guess the only thing that is making me hopeful is that there's a new generation coming, and I think they're better at it. Yeah.
One of the things that I did when my girls were in high school, they were too young to vote themselves, but anybody can register people to vote. So I got the high school principal's permission to set up a table outside of the cafeteria. And at that time, MTV had a Rock the Vote campaign. I don't know if they still do that. But for a small amount of money, I was able to buy a bunch of stickers and a banner to put on the front of the table. And we registered close to 100 people over 2 days. And most of them were not students. I mean, there were seniors who had turned 18, but most of them were employees at the high school who had never registered to vote. And it was interesting because some of the young people who did register would say, I don't know what my parents are, but I want to register like them. And I said, well, who do they talk about? Who inspires them? What, who are they cheering on? And other times teens would say, well, my parents like so-and-so, and I don't agree with that. So I want to vote the other way. What should I? And, of course, you can't tell people how to register, but you can help them think about how to register. And so it's a little late for this year's election, but I would encourage people to help young people register by getting those forms from your county election office and making it possible so that these new voices that Martha's talking about are people voting.
Sorry.
Also we, I think we have probably similar polity, Melanie, in our like General Assembly for you and General Synod. Sometimes we have folks who are awarded voice without vote. And so I think it's important to know that young people always have a voice, and they can state their opinions even if they're not a voter yet, and they can become educated. And Martha, as you're talking about that too, my snark arose within me when you were talking about how your kids are just talking about this all the time and they're so good at it, and I'm assuming like they're okay even though they're talking about gender identity all the time and experimenting and switching around with pronouns and all that kind of thing. Like they're okay. They're not like,
they're not
massively.
Not worried about, I mean, I don't know if they're okay, right? I think that the youth mental health crisis right now is real. I think the pandemic took a really hard toll on young people in particular. I think it depends. My 16-year-old would choose online school if she had the choice. She doesn't like getting out of bed. She doesn't like sitting in a classroom, but she loves doing her schoolwork, right? My 12-year-old would go nuts if we had to go back to online school. But I think that the pandemic really was hard on a lot of people, and there was a lot more anxiety. But on this issue, and I know I live in a very special town, right? I know that we're more accepting. It's a little bit of a blue bubble. And so I realize that not every young person in this country has the same experience, but I do think that the isolation and being misunderstood that that was true earlier for earlier generations is less so. And I will say the other thing, and as much as I think the Don't Say Gay bill is one of the worst things we've seen in a really long time, I feel so much less worried than I did when we saw the same thing in the 90s, because the culture hadn't caught up, right? In the 90s, there wasn't all these gay celebrities telling you it was going to be okay. There weren't all these shows on television. There weren't TikTokers, right? You have a lot of other outlets for learning about these things and for seeing the normalization of them that didn't used to exist. So of course we need to talk about it in school. And of course this is the most, it's ridiculous, it's penalizing, it's stigmatizing, it's all of those things, but there are other sources.
I appreciate you saying that. And I also appreciate you lifting up the reality of the mental health crisis and youth. And I want to say too that, the Don't Say Gay bill, the legislation, Florida's on my mind right now because I got actually a SECUS newsletter about them condemning the amendment that Florida just passed to be able to basically censure or revoke licenses of K-3 teachers who teach about gender identity or sexual orientation. And now there is legislation where the medical board may remove the ability for anyone under 18 to have gender affirming care, which means that folks who are on hormones or puberty blockers will no longer be able to have that. And that is not only a physical medical decision, but that is a mental health issue as well, because that is going to, or there are already testimony from youth saying, like I was suicidal before I got this hormonal help. So I think that that it's really important for us to realize for folks on this call who are running Our Whole Lives programs, or who are doing Our Whole Lives trainings, or who are thinking about running Our Whole Lives programs, that this is actually life-saving work that we do. And that even when we are not able to guarantee that there is good quality sexuality education happening in every public school, what we can do is offer it in our church communities, and know that we can send folks to training, and that we work really hard to have a good quality training materials for all of our trainers, and to give everyone a consistent and robust training experience, so that you can learn some tips and tricks about how, and some good research-based information about how to offer sexuality education in your faith communities. And that is something that we can do and that we should do. And it is the work of our denominations and of our faiths to offer that to our young people and to children and families.
And I would add, open your doors. This is, as people who are in UCC and UU congregations, lean toward wanting to educate their kids with sexuality, about sexuality anyway, but a lot of people in the community might want to do that if they knew that there were a way to be supported as their kids' primary sex educators. But, they're flailing around in the dark because the schools aren't talking about it, and maybe their own communities aren't talking about it. So open your doors if you can, and invite people in. There are also some congregations that create programs just for their communities. So they have their own sort of in-house program, and then they create a secular program using Our Whole Lives in the community. So, there are ways that we can serve the public with Our Whole Lives to a wider extent. And I think that's just going to become more and more welcome and necessary as time goes on.
Yeah, and you may need to do some education of your community about your faith community and your faith beliefs, because people may not realize that when you say my church is offering sex ed, that it's offering, really good comprehensive sex ed. So sorry to cut you off there, Martha. Go ahead.
I just want to go back to these laws about gender affirming care, because they're really so beyond infuriating, especially because we are in a political environment where people are saying parents' rights, parents' rights, parents' rights. As a parent, you have the right to decide exactly what is taught in school. If you don't like this one lesson, no one should be able to learn it. If you don't like this book, it should be off the shelves at the library. But here you are as a parent making the most personal medical decision for your child, and you're being told, no, you can't do that because because you're wrong in this instance. And it is an attack on just the very existence of trans, of being trans, of anyone being trans, and it's what's going on now, which is truly scary, is that the clinics that provide the care are under threat in the way that abortion clinics were under threat in the early 90s. And the fact, that anyone would do this in the name of a religious belief is horrifying.
And it becomes such a justice issue, not only in terms of medical privacy, but also in terms of, not everybody has the ability to go out of state and find a healthcare provider in another state, whether it's for gender affirming care or for pregnancy termination or whatever reason. It's a luxury. I remember my mom talking about going to college in the 50s and in the early 50s, and that there were always people who got pregnant and they just went to visit their aunt in Switzerland. And she said, I don't know that they were actually all going to Switzerland, but they were all going somewhere, and they were coming back and they weren't pregnant. But
9 months later, or
they were having abortions, but they had the wherewithal to find a place that they could do it safely. And that's not a luxury that everybody has.
This is the problem with all of the rules that are being put in place. They are only going to hurt certain people. My children will always be able to get an abortion.
Yeah,
they will. And my mother, I probably shouldn't talk about her. She had an abortion in the 60s before it was legal. She was about to get married to my father. They, it could have been just as easy for them to have said, okay, fine, we'll just ramp up the timeline, but they didn't want to. They wanted to finish their educations. My grandfather was a doctor and knew other doctors, and there you have it, right? Like, that's how it works. And that is, I think, and I know I'm not supposed to get too political right here.
You
but
can
I
be political.
Okay. I do think that some of the people who are voting in this direction are doing so with a little thought in the back of their head that I'll be able to get around it. Or if it's not a conscious thought that they'll be able to get around it, because of their privilege, they haven't met a problem they couldn't get around. And so that's always there too. And I just think we have to, my father's a philosopher, right? And so we grew up talking about the veil of ignorance. You have to make laws not knowing who you are going to be in this world. And that's how we should be thinking.
And the other thing is that there was I was listening to a doctor talk about, there are so many procedures, medical procedures, that affect uteruses that have nothing to do with whether somebody's pregnant or not. And it's just a healthcare, procedure. And yet the laws, because like the drug that opens the cervix so that you can have a dilation and curettage, or, whatever procedure you want, the pharmacist now can say, no, I'm not going to give that to you. I mean, you could be 60 years old and need a procedure on your uterus, and the pharmacist could say, you're not going to get the meds that your doctor said you need because it could create an abortion. Like
one story that I wrote about a few weeks or months ago, time kind of smushes. A checkout clerk at Walmart decided that this 40-year-old woman shouldn't be allowed to buy a box of condoms because he didn't believe in birth control. Yeah. And condoms are usually left out of that debate. We have there's a lot of misinformation around how IUDs work. There's a lot of misinformation around how emergency contraception works. And all of those are wrapped up in the when life begins, which is not a question I ever even remotely try to answer. But I stick with the science of when a pregnancy begins from a scientific nature. But so condoms are usually left out, but this John, the checkout guy, basically said, in front of a whole lot of other customers, I'll do all your suntan lotion and your whatever, but you can't buy those because it goes against my religion. And I really think we have this warped sense now that somehow freedom of religion is the freedom to put your religious beliefs in front of other people versus the freedom to practice your religious beliefs free from other people. And I really hope that message is what we can change. We can somehow, I don't know that we're going to change the court rulings, but I do hope we can change the narrative a little bit. Like that's
And I want to just pop in with a pastoral moment and say say a couple things. First of all, I want to say that the United Church of Christ has a long history of affirming LGBTQ plus folks, and you are beloved by God, and you are created in God's image. I also want to say that God loves people who have abortions, and so do you. You love people who have abortions, whether you know it or not. So I just want to affirm that, and affirm that clearly as a Christian denomination, a mainline Christian denomination in the United, and say that is definitely the stance of the national setting of the United Church of Christ and General Synod resolutions, which have come from the whole denomination. And I know that the UUA has similar statements.
We might use different language, but absolutely, our values are absolutely the same. Without stigma or shame or judgment.
Yeah, and I also just so that's like a big overarching pastoral moment. And then I want to get into like legislation nitty gritty, because I was really honored to be part of a press conference last week where in the state where I live, which is Washington State, they were the state legislators and the governor were unveiling some legislation that they are introducing to protect and strengthen reproductive rights in Washington state and gender affirming care. And I was struck by two things simultaneously. One was the strength and the number of voices who were in favor of this, and secondly, the absolute nitty-grittiness that people have to pay attention to right now. So, for instance, there's some shield laws being introduced so that if someone comes to Washington from another state, that it would protect the people who are providing those services for gender affirming care and reproductive health, so that, because there are laws in other states that say that you can get in trouble if you're in another state and help someone. So they're trying to shield people from that. There's a law about hospital mergers, because there are some certain religious organizations that tend to provide care and take over independent clinics that are in financial distress. And then what happens is sometimes care goes away. Gender affirming care and reproductive health care goes away because of the religious beliefs of those organizations that own those hospitals. So there's some laws being introduced to protect the rights of folks and the care that can be provided in the event of a hospital merger. So I was just really struck by how kind of precise and nitty-gritty legislation to protect rights of people to get healthcare have to be right now.
Well, and how important it is to be an educated consumer. When I lived in central New Jersey, one of the main, what do you call it, the neonatal, like the highest level of neonatal care that you could get was run by a religious organization.
The hospital I was born at, I believe, in New Brunswick.
Yes. Oh, there you go. And you need to know, before you get taken in an ambulance or you allow your child to be taken in an ambulance, you need to know the politics, unfortunately, of that healthcare system to see what your rights are going to be.
I think we saw this play out, on the Oberlin campus at the beginning of this semester. They outsourced to a Catholic healthcare system in the area. They outsourced their health center, which a lot of college campuses are doing now as a cost-saving measure. They don't feel they can't afford to run their own health center and have their own staff. And so they outsource it. They chose this, which may very well have been probably the largest provider network in the area. And the kind of irony of the situation was that the president of Oberlin had recently been on a panel with Kamala Harris and others talking about the importance of reproductive health for college-age students, and then promised that her campus would still have these services. And it took one, they signed the agreement, and then it took one reporter from a local newspaper to make a phone call to the provider, and they're like, "Oh, we won't do that.
Ooh.
We will only provide contraception. We only provide emergency contraception in the case of rape, and we will only provide contraception if there's another medical, birth control pills, if there's another medical indication for it." So the backlash on that, because Oberlin is a relatively liberal institution, and I'm sure has a lot of liberal alums who were calling and saying, "What are you doing?" Was pretty swift. But that's because it made the news. Had it not made the news, I don't know what, we don't know what would have happened. And I want to speak to something that Amy said, because whereas you're looking at precision of laws that are going through to help, a lot of the problems we're seeing is the unprecise nature of the restrictions. And so in Idaho, there was disagreement over whether the campus could provide birth control at all, because there's a few bills in Idaho. There's a new trigger law that went through banning abortion, but more importantly, there's a bill that is banning the promotion of abortion. And then there's a bill that was passed in 1972 that had said that no state employee could advertise services, including abortion and anything designed to prevent conception. So the general counsel of the University of Idaho, in his obvious, no doubt in his cover the university's ass kind of role, that's his job, was like, wait, in this political climate with these laws, the new ones plus the old one, I would suggest we stay away from birth control altogether. We can provide condoms, but that's it. Now, the president of the university and the vice president of the university both said, no, that's not what's going to happen. Don't worry about it. But what he did say was, we are beholden to the laws of Idaho because we are a public education institution, and we get, so the legislature and the attorney general can really decide how they're going to interpret these laws and may usurp our authority to say, no, we're going to keep providing it. So I think right now there's a lot of in the states where restrictive laws have been passed over what's going to be okay. I think what's going to get caught in the crosshairs first is probably emergency contraception.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think too, like you were saying earlier, Martha, that I mean, we could all, I'm sure, write a lengthy paper on why this is important, but I want to go back to what you were saying earlier, which is that it's because of privilege, right? And laws are supposed to apply to everyone. And so having legislation that will protect people who don't have a grandfather who's a doctor and knows other doctors, or who don't have money to travel somewhere else, or don't have connections, or it should be that healthcare is for everyone. And I know that's not how it is, but I do think that it is important for us to be aware of what the laws are and what the proposed legislation is in our particular areas, so that we can uphold our values and our faith values for what's important to us around.
Yeah, and
sexuality.
It's also important to know that people who run for your school board, people who run for your town council, they're
Judges.
affecting things that happen in your school district. They might be plotting their way to have bigger and better public offices. So it can be a pain in the neck to try to research what school board candidates stand for. But like, I have trailed people on, Facebook and LinkedIn and done the detective work. I found out that, one guy was rabidly anti-choice, but nothing in the interviews that he had done had said that. I had to really do the detective work. And so join League of Women Voters or whatever the organizations are in your area to really learn who's running and who's going to be making the decisions. And Martha, I was wondering if you could recommend some media sources that people should be keeping an eye on, that you really trust.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Rewire News Group, which I used to write for, they have their editor-in-chief and their head of their legal department really analyze all the laws that are coming out. And that's a good place to look. I think, it's your general media education. Just if you see an article, check out the source before you take it as truth just on the face of it. But I agree with you on the school board issue. We're having a pretty divisive school board race here in my town, which is really politically homogenous. So it's interesting to see the school board, but our school district is struggling a lot. And the problem with school board races, there's a couple of issues. Mostly I have problems with people who don't know what it takes to run a school, who are very committed. They want to do a really good job. And I really, I applaud them for taking on what is often just a job where everyone will yell at them from both sides of every issue. But at the same time, I don't know that people know what they're getting into. But a lot of it is just everyone, like all politicians, speak in platitudes. I'm for all children. I'm for, robust education. So you do have to drill down. And I'll say this, we have so many issues in my school district. I don't think any of the candidates have ever spoken about sex ed because that's not on our radar. And yet, in my very liberal school district, my daughter in 8th grade, and I have another one who will be in 8th grade next year, carried around the damn egg for a week as a why you shouldn't become a teen parent exercise.
Yeah, in my girls' elementary school, one parent objected to the Captain Underpants series. And so the librarian took it off the display, kept it in the library, but took it off display. I'm like, Captain Underpants, what kid doesn't run around in a cape in their underpants at some point?
That's more clothes than people wore.
Somebody was asking if you have recommendations for reliable Canadian news sources.
Oh, I don't. I will check that out and see if I can find some. I do. My clipping service does provide me with a lot of Canadian articles, but they're all behind a paywall, so I haven't been able to really judge them.
And somebody was also asking the name of the wire service that you use.
I use Muckrack. It's not super cheap. I used to be able to do this with just Google News alerts, but for whatever reason, their algorithms changed and they stopped. I still get the alert for every time somebody is caught masturbating in public around the country, and it happens way more often than you want to think. But other than that, I wasn't getting good stuff, so I started to pay for it. It isn't cheap, but I do split it with a friend, so maybe some of the groups could get together and split it with each other.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of the politicians who are making laws are found doing exactly the things that they say that nobody else should have the right to do.
There's the methinks he doth protest too much.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm misquoting Shakespeare for sure, but but there's absolutely something in there where if you're this committed to opposing something, there is often something going on.
Yeah, I'm looking in the chat. There's a lot of praise for Captain Underpants.
Martha, as we're getting up to close to the top of the hour, is there any words of wisdom you would give to those of us? Most people who have at least chimed in on the chat are volunteer sexuality educators in their churches and congregations. Is there any last words or words of wisdom you'd us with besides tra la la from Mark Huffman? Thank you, Mark.
I think my words would just be, well, first of all, thank you, right? Like this is important work, and the fact that you're doing it on a volunteer basis is also it's tremendous, and at this moment, it does in some communities make you a target. And that's thank you for being willing to do it, and know that you're making a difference in kids' lives. And I guess that's where when we look at the macro and we look at the whole world and the state of it, it is so overwhelming, and it feels like we're just under a ton of bricks that we can't get out of and I think the worst part of it is have gone backwards, right? We had this progress and now we've been kind of pushed backwards. But when you look at it on the level of each individual kid that you get to talk to and that you get to be the askable adult for, and maybe just make a difference, I think you should feel good about that. I think you should take that interaction with each of them and just feel good that you are doing something important.
Thank you for that.
Thank you so much. We say that to y'all, and you've heard it now from the great and wonderful Martha Kempner as well. And we mean that so much. We appreciate so much what you do, and you are saving lives. And so keep on keeping on. And sign up for Martha's newsletter, Sex on Wednesday. Yeah.
Thanks for being here, everybody. See you in January.
Thank you so much.
For having me.
Yeah.